On my 22nd year on the river, something turned the wheel under my hand. It had a wheel for a hand, and it was steering my packet for me. My name is on a Mississippi pilot's license signed at New Orleans in 1859. Holcomb, day and night ticket, St. Louis to the passes. I started cub pilot in '52 at 15 years old under a man named Bixby, who took 2 years of my life and gave me back the river in exchange. I lost 4 years to the war on a hospital steamer and came back to the wheel in '66. In October of 1874, I had been on the river, on and off, 22 years, or 21. The count depends on whether you give me the war years or not. I have stopped giving them to myself. The packet was the Estelle Vernon side-wheeler, 240 feet on the deck, high-pressure boilers, Memphis to New Orleans, on the late October schedule with 68 cabin passengers and a hold of cotton bound for the Hibernia warehouse. Pilot's wages that year were $320 a month in gold, which is what a man got for being the only person on the boat who could see in the dark. 2 pilots stood the watches, 4 hours on, 4 hours off. My partner was a younger man out of Cairo named Renshaw, who had his day license and was working his nights, and the cub apprentice was a 15-year-old boy from Natchez sleeping in the Texas cabin below my feet. The pilot house at Pemaquid is, I keep saying, Pemaquid. I have never been to Pemaquid. The pilot house of the Estelle Vernon sat on top of the Texas deck 42 feet above the river with windows on all 4 sides and a spoked wheel 8 feet across in the middle of the floor. You stood at that wheel. You did not sit. The spokes were turned ash with brass collars, and at the top of every spoke was a worn place where 40 years of pilots' hands had rubbed the brass to a polish you could read your face in. My right hand sat on the second spoke from the top, always. My weight a little forward of the wheel, the way you stand when you mean to push. We took on Wood and 3 passengers at Greenville on the 13th and came down past Lake Providence with the moon up. Renshaw stood the 8 to midnight. I came on at midnight in a wool coat and a soft cap and the black silk vest my wife had stitched me in '68, and Renshaw handed me the wheel the way pilots do. She's running clean, no traffic below the bend, fog forming on the Louisiana side. Watch the snag above Hurricane Island. He went down. He was asleep by 12:10. The fog came up off the river the way lower Miss Fog comes, not from above, from the water. You see it form on the surface in long banks like a man unrolling a bolt of muslin across a counter, and then the banks lift. And by 1 in the morning I had not seen the Louisiana bank in an hour. I blew the whistle every minute and a half by the brass case clock screwed to the rail above the binnacle. 1 long blast. You wait. The river answers 2 miles down with the sound of your own whistle coming back smaller, off the bluff above Vicksburg. The way a man's name comes back to him out of an empty church. I had the 2 leadsmen at the bow, calling soundings. Mark 3, by the Mark Twain, quarter less Twain, which is to say 18 feet, 12 feet, 10 and a half. The river above Vicksburg in October of '74 was full of trouble. Half the sunken ironclads from '63 were still in the bed where Porter and Farragut had put them, and the spring rise had moved the chutes by 100 yards in places, and a pilot read those changes by the look of the bank and the slick on the water and the way the eddy turned at the foot of a willow point. At night, in fog, you read them by the leadsman, and by 22 years of not having drowned. A pilot does not steer the river. A pilot is the river's argument with itself. You lean against the wheel, and the wheel leans against the rudder, and the rudder leans against 40,000 cubic feet a second of moving water. And somewhere in that lean there is a moment, every few minutes, when the wheel wants to turn one way, and the river wants you to let it. You do not let it. You set your weight. You hold. So at 1:15 in the morning, 2 miles above the head of Hurricane Island, the wheel turned an inch under my hand. To starboard. I want to be precise. My weight was on the wheel. My right hand on the second spoke. My left on the third. The rudder was straight. The Estelle was making 12 knots in slack water with a half-foot bow wave. And the wheel, which is to say the rudder behind me, 22 fathoms of chain and bell crank away, turned an inch to starboard. Without me. A wheel does not do that. You can stand a pilot's wheel against a 5-knot cross-current and feel the river argue with you through 8 feet of ash and brass. You can let go of the wheel and feel it pull. But you cannot stand at the wheel with your weight on it and have the wheel move without you. Not an inch. Not a quarter inch. I set my weight harder. I brought the wheel back. One spoke. The rudder answered. I held. I called down the leadsman. Mark 4, Mark 3 by the Mark Twain. We were in the channel. We had not drifted. At 1:22, the pilot's bell to the engine room rang once, which is the signal for stop. I had not pulled the bell rope. I looked at the rope. It was hanging straight from the bulkhead the way a bell rope hangs when no one has touched it. Below me, I heard the engineer's voice through the speaking tube. Stop signal acknowledged, sir. The paddle wheels slowed. The Estelle began to drift on the current. I rang 2 bells. Backer. I rang 1. Stop. I rang 3 short. Half ahead. The paddles took us back into way. I held the wheel as if it were a man's wrist, and I was checking him for a pulse. The binnacle on the Estelle Vernon was a brass column at the front of the pilot house with the compass on top and a drawer below for the pilot's charts and his tobacco pouch and a brass-handled wheel-spoke marker. I had been on the boat 8 weeks. I had opened that drawer twice, both times for tobacco. I opened it now, for something to do with my hands. Under the tobacco pouch there was a chart, folded river chart, lower Mississippi, head of Hurricane Island to the Vicksburg landing. Marked in a copperplate hand I did not recognize, and then, the second look, recognized completely. Same downslant, same Roman J. My Uncle Owen Holcomb's hand, dead these 11 years. My uncle had kept the log on a hospital steamer called the Memphis Belle, not the famous one, the earlier one. which had taken a Confederate shore battery's hot shot in her midships boiler in May of '63 and broken in half above Milliken's Bend. 83 men in the water. He was one of them. I had read his log because the Army gave it back to my aunt, and my aunt gave it to me when she died. I had read every page. I knew his J, the way you know your wife's footstep in another room. The chart in the binnacle drawer was marked in his hand, marked for soundings he never took, dated October 14th, 1874, which was tomorrow, or today, depending on what side of midnight you were on. He had been dead since May of '63. I put the chart back in the drawer. I closed the drawer. I did not close it well because my hand was, I want to say shaking, but it was not shaking. It was loose, like the hand of a man who has stopped knowing what hand is his. Below me, the engine bell rang again. 2 bells. Backer. I had not pulled it. The rope on my bulkhead had not moved. The paddles answered. The Estelle began to drift back the way she had come. I rang ahead. 3 short. The engineer's voice through the tube. Conflicting signal, sir. Confirm half ahead. I confirmed. The paddles took us back into way. My right hand was on the second spoke. My weight was on the wheel, and the wheel turned half a spoke to port under my hand, without me. And there is a rule old pilots gave you. Bixby gave it to me on a hot afternoon below Cape Girardeau in '53 with the river low and the sandbars showing. He said it like this: do not let the wheel turn under your hand without your weight on it. A wheel that moves and you not moving it, something else is steering, son, and it is steering you on to something. I was 22 years from that afternoon. I had heard the rule from 3 old pilots since. Each of them said it the same way. Your weight on the wheel, always. None of them told me what to do if the rule was broken, because none of them had had it broken and stayed alive to tell. At 1:45, I looked to my right, at the place beside me where a partner pilot would stand if I had one on the watch. Something was there, about my height, a wool coat with brass buttons, a soft cap, a black silk vest, the dress of a Mississippi pilot in October of 1874, where its right hand should have been. There was a wheel, a spoked pilot's wheel, 8 inches across, turned ash with brass collars, the spokes worn at the top in the same places. Mine were worn. It turned, slow, half a revolution every few seconds, and the wheel under my hands turned with it, inch by inch. To starboard. To starboard, I knew without thinking, was the head of Hurricane Island, a 90-degree bend with a sandbar that had moved twice in the spring rise and an ironclad's broken Rambo rusted into the bed at 4 fathoms. The Estelle in this fog at 12 knots making to starboard of the channel would put her bow on that Rambo inside of 7 minutes. 68 cabin passengers, a boy from Natchez asleep in the Texas, Renshaw with his face in his arms below. I set my weight. I put my weight on the wheel the way Bixby had taught me. Shoulder, hip, heel, the whole of a man behind 2 spokes of ash. I held the rudder amidships. The wheel beside me kept turning. The thing in the pilot's coat did not look at me. It looked at the river. The way I had looked at the river for 22 years. as if it owned the look. The engine bell rang one. Stop. I had not pulled it. I rang 3 short. Half ahead. The engineer's voice came up the tube, angry. Mr. Holcomb, conflicting signals, and confirm. I confirmed. I told him to lock the engine to my voice command only and to ignore the bell for the next half hour. He did not like it. He did it. The wheel beside me turned faster. Half a revolution a second now. My wheel pulled harder. I held. I held with both hands and my chest against the upper spokes and my left boot wedged against the binnacle column and my right against the deck bolt. I called the leadsmen for soundings I did not need to hear. Mark 3 by the Mark Twain, quarter less Twain. We were in the channel. We were still in the channel. At the head of Hurricane Island, the channel made its 90-degree bend to port. I put the wheel hard to port. 3 full turns. My weight forward. The Estelle came around. The thing beside me, the wheel where its hand should be, stopped turning. Stopped. As if the river had let it go. We cleared the head of the island at 2:11. I rang ahead full. The paddles took us down the long reach to Vicksburg with the bluff lights showing through the fog at 3 o'clock. I did not look to my right again. I did not need to. When the Vicksburg landing came up at 4, I rang the bell for tie-up, and Renshaw came up the stair, rubbing his face, and I handed him the wheel, and I went down to the Texas cabin, and I did not sleep. Then in the morning I opened the binnacle drawer. The chart was not there. Tobacco pouch, brass-handled wheel spoke marker. No chart in copper plate hand. No date for tomorrow. I asked Renshaw if he had cleaned the drawer. He said he had not opened it in the 8 weeks we had been on the boat together.